Chapter 14. The Siege of Ridge. The cave went silent except for Naira's breathing and the sound of water dripping somewhere in the darkness. "How many?" Torin asked, and his voice was calm but his hands were already moving to check his weapons. "At least 40 vehicles. Maybe more. They're coming in from multiple directions and they're not trying to hide it." Naira's words came fast and her chest was heaving like she'd been running. "I saw trucks on the logging roads. Vans on the mountain passes. They're coordinating." "How long do we have?" Atticus asked. 20 minutes. Maybe less." My stomach dropped and my hands started shaking because 20 minutes wasn't enough time to do anything except panic. "We need to leave," Lysandra said. "Now. Before they get here." "And go where?" Torin asked. "They're coming from every direction. If we run straight into them." "Then what do you suggest?" "We fight." "That's suicide." "Maybe. But it's better than getting captured." The argument was starting and I could feel the panic rising in my chest because we didn't have time for this. Didn't have time to debate strategy when the hunters were already moving. "Stop," I said. And my voice came out louder than I intended. Everyone looked at me. "We don't have time to argue. We need to decide. Now." Torin nodded. "He's right." "Naira, what did you see? Give me specifics." She took a breath and her hands were shaking but her voice was steady. "Main force coming up the logging road from the south. Maybe 15 vehicles. Smaller teams on the mountain passes to the east and west. They're trying to box us in." "What about the north? River Valley?" "I didn't see vehicles but I saw movement. Could be foot teams." "How coordinated are they?" "Very. They're using radios. Drones overhead. This isn't a random sweep. They know we're here." My chest felt tight and my throat was closing up because if they knew we were here then someone had told them, and the only person who'd been outside recently was Calder. I looked at him and he was standing near the cave wall with his arms crossed and his expression unreadable. "Did you tell them?" I asked. "No, how do I know that?" "You don't. But we don't have time for this conversation right now." He was right but I hated that he was right because I wanted to know, needed to know if he'd betrayed us again. "Elijah," Atticus said quietly. "Focus. We'll deal with Calder later." I nodded but my hands were still shaking and my heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Torin was already moving, pulling a map from his pack and spreading it on the cave floor. "If they're coming from the south and boxing us in from the east and west, our best defensive position is here." He pointed to a spot on the map. "Old logging yard. High ground. Multiple escape routes if we need them." "That's too exposed," Lysandra said. "Everywhere is exposed. At least there we can see them coming." "What about the river valley?" Atticus asked. "We put scouts there. If they're sending foot teams, we need to know about it before they get close." "I'll go," Naira said. "No. You're our eyes in the air. I need you overhead telling us what's happening." Torin looked at Rowan. "You take the river valley. Stay low. Report anything that moves." Rowan nodded and disappeared into the passage without a word. "Atticus, you're with me at the logging yard. Lysandra, take the east ridge. If they try to flank us, I need to know immediately." "What about me?" I asked. Torin looked at me and his expression was serious. "You stay with Atticus. You don't shift unless you absolutely have to. The more you use your power, the more determined they'll be to capture you. I can fight. I know you can. But every time you shift, you give them more reason to come after you. We need to be smart about this." My chest felt tight because he was right but I hated feeling useless, hated the idea of hiding while everyone else fought. "What about the East Ridge approach?" Calder asked. "If they're coordinating, they might try to hit us from multiple angles simultaneously." Torin studied the map. "You're right, Lysandra, focus on the East Ridge. That's the most likely secondary approach. If they come that way, fall back to the logging yard and we'll regroup." "Got it. Everyone clear?" Nods all around. "Then move. We've got maybe 15 minutes before they're on top of us." The cave emptied fast and I followed Atticus through the passage because my legs were shaking and my hands wouldn't stop trembling and I couldn't think straight. The forest outside was gray with early morning light and the fog was thick enough that I could barely see 20 feet ahead. The air smelled like wet cedar and mud and something metallic that might have been fear. "Stay close," Atticus said. "Don't do anything stupid." "Define stupid." "Shifting when you don't have to. Fighting when you should be running. Getting yourself killed because you're trying to prove something." "I'm not trying to prove anything." "Good. Keep it that way." We moved through the forest and my heart was pounding and my breath was coming too fast and I couldn't stop thinking about what Torin had said. Every time you shift, you give them more reason to come after you. But what was I supposed to do? Let everyone else fight while I hid. The logging yard appeared through the fog like a ghost. Rusted equipment scattered across muddy ground. Stacks of rotting timber covered in moss. A crane that hadn't moved in decades standing like a skeletal monument to something that used to matter. Torin was already there, crouched behind a stack of logs with his rifle ready. "Positions. Atticus, take the north side. Elijah, stay behind cover and don't move unless I tell you to." I wanted to argue, but my throat was too tight and my hands were shaking too badly to hold a weapon anyway. I crouched behind a rusted bulldozer and tried to breathe. The fog was getting thicker and the light was dim and gray and everything felt wrong. Felt like the world was holding its breath waiting for something terrible to happen. Naira's voice crackled through the radio. "I've got eyes on the main force. 15 vehicles confirmed. They're 2 minutes out." "Copy," Torin said. "Everyone hold position." The radio stayed quiet for maybe 30 seconds and then Naira's voice came back. "Faster now. More urgent. Secondary teams moving into position on the East Ridge. I count 6 vehicles. They're setting up blocking positions." My stomach tightened because the East Ridge was supposed to be where Calder said they'd attack, and now they were there, and I couldn't tell if that meant he'd been right or if he'd somehow known they'd be there all along. "How far out?" Torin asked. 3 minutes behind the main force. They're coordinating. I can see radio operators in the lead vehicles. Copy. "Lysandra, you see them?" "Negative." Lysandra's voice came through. "Fog's too thick for my position." "They're there," Naira said. "Trust me. They're setting up a pincer movement. Main force hits from the south, secondary teams close in from the east." My hands were shaking worse now because a pincer movement meant they were trying to trap us, meant they'd planned this, meant someone had told them exactly where we'd be. Another 30 seconds of silence and then Naira again, and her voice was different now, was tight with something that might have been fear, but wait. "There's more. River Valley. I've got movement in the River Valley. Multiple teams on foot. They're moving fast and they're trying to stay out of sight, but I can see them." "How many?" Torin asked, and his voice was still calm but I could hear the tension underneath it. "At least 20. Maybe more. They're spread out in a line formation. They're trying to come up from the north." My chest went cold because the north was supposed to be clear, was supposed to be the one direction we didn't have to worry about, and now there were hunters coming from there too. "They're boxing us in," I said, and my voice came out as barely more than a whisper. "Rowan," Torin said into the radio. "You copy?" "River Valley. Multiple teams moving north to south. Static." Then Rowan's voice, calm but with an edge of urgency underneath. "I see them. I'm falling back to higher ground." "Do it. Report positions every 30 seconds. Copy." Naira's voice crackled through again. "Main force is 90 seconds out. They're accelerating. I think they know we're here." "Of course they know," Atticus muttered from somewhere to my left. "East Ridge teams are moving into final positions," Naira continued. "They've got equipment I haven't seen before. Looks like specialized gear. Heavy cases. Could be dragon suppression equipment." Dragon suppression equipment. The words hit me like a physical blow because that meant they weren't just trying to capture me. They were trying to neutralize me, trying to make sure I couldn't shift or fight or do anything except surrender. "How long until they're in range?" Torin asked. "Main force? 60 seconds. East Ridge? 2 minutes. River Valley teams are moving slower but they're coordinated. They're not rushing. They're trying to tighten the net," Torin said quietly. "Make sure we can't run." "Exactly," Naira said. "This is coordinated. This is professional. They've done this before." My hands were burning and my chest was tight and I could feel the shift trying to happen again because my body knew we were trapped, knew we were surrounded, knew that running wasn't going to work. 30 seconds, Naira said. "Main force is 30 seconds out. They're spreading into assault formation. I count at least 40 personnel. Maybe more. 40. We had maybe 8 people who could fight." The math didn't work. "Everyone ready?" Torin asked. Nobody answered because there was nothing to say. Nothing to do except wait for the hunters to arrive and hope that somehow we'd survive what was coming. 20 seconds, Naira said. "They're moving fast. Really fast. I think they're going to hit hard and hit fast." "Copy," Torin said. "Hold positions. Wait for my signal." The sound of engines was getting louder now. Was close enough that I could hear individual vehicles, could hear the rumble of the APCs and the higher pitch of the trucks and the sound of tires on gravel. 10 seconds, Naira said. "They're almost on top of you. I'm moving to higher altitude for better visibility." "Do it," Torin said. And then the first vehicle appeared through the fog. "Copy," Torin said. "Everyone hold position. 2 minutes." My chest felt like it was going to explode and my hands were shaking so badly I had to press them against the cold metal of the bulldozer to make them stop. I could hear engines now, distant but getting closer. The sound of tires on gravel. Voices calling to each other through the fog. "They're spreading out," Naira reported. "Flanking positions on both sides. They know where you are." "How?" Lysandra's voice came through the radio. "How do they know?" Nobody answered because we all knew the answer and nobody wanted to say it out loud. The first vehicle appeared through the fog and my stomach dropped because it wasn't a truck or a van. It was an armored personnel carrier with a mounted gun on top and reinforced plating on the sides. "Contact," Torin said quietly. "Hold fire until I give the signal." More vehicles appeared. Trucks. Vans. Another APC. Men in tactical gear spreading out across the logging yard with weapons raised and movements coordinated like they'd done this 100 times before. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might break through my ribs and my breath was coming in short gasps and I couldn't stop shaking. "Steady," Atticus whispered from somewhere to my left. The hunters moved closer and I could see their faces now. Could see the determination in their eyes and the way they held their weapons like they knew exactly what they were doing. One of them raised a hand and the others stopped moving. The silence that followed was worse than the noise because it meant they were listening, meant they were looking, meant they knew we were here. "Now," Torin said. Gunfire erupted from 3 directions at once and the hunters scattered, diving behind vehicles and equipment and returning fire so fast I barely had time to process what was happening. Bullets hit the bulldozer and the sound was deafening, was metal screaming and ricochets whining through the air and my ears ringing so loud I couldn't hear anything else. I pressed myself against the ground and tried to breathe but my chest was too tight and my throat was closing up and I couldn't think. "Elijah." Atticus's voice cut through the noise. "Stay down." I stayed down but my hands were burning and my chest felt like it was on fire and I knew what was happening, knew what my body wanted to do. Not yet. Not unless I had to. The gunfire continued and I could hear Torin shouting orders and Naira reporting positions through the radio and the hunters advancing despite the resistance. "They're pushing the north side," Atticus called. "I need support." "On it," Lysandra responded. More gunfire. More shouting. The smell of gunpowder and mud and something burning. My hands were shaking and the heat in my chest was building and I couldn't hold it back much longer. A hunter appeared around the side of the bulldozer and his eyes went wide when he saw me. He raised his weapon. I didn't think. My hands shifted before I could stop them. Fingers elongating into claws and scales spreading across my skin like fire, and I lunged forward faster than I knew I could move. The hunter went down and his weapon clattered across the mud and I was standing over him with claws extended and my breath coming in ragged gasps. "Elijah." Atticus was beside me, pulling me back. "Control it. You need to control it." I tried to pull the shift back but it was harder than before. Was like trying to hold back a flood with my bare hands. My fingers slowly returned to normal and the scales receded and I was shaking so badly I could barely stand. "I'm sorry," I said. "Don't apologize. Just stay focused." The gunfire was getting closer and I could hear engines revving and tires spinning in mud and voices shouting coordinates. "They're flanking from the east," Lysandra reported. "Multiple teams." "I'm falling back." "Copy," Torin said. "Regroup at the logging yard." But something was wrong because the east ridge was supposed to be the secondary approach, was supposed to be where they might attack but probably wouldn't. Calder had said the main assault would come from the east ridge. But the main assault had come from the south. And now they were flanking from the east anyway. My stomach twisted because either Calder had been wrong or he'd lied, and I didn't know which was worse. "Atticus," I said. "The east ridge. What about it?" Calder said they'd attack from there, but they didn't. They came from the south instead. So he was wrong. Or he lied. Atticus's expression darkened but he didn't have time to respond because Naira's voice crackled through the radio, breathless and urgent. "Main force is regrouping. They're consolidating positions south of the yard. I count at least 40 personnel now. Maybe more. They're setting up a perimeter." "How far out?" Torin asked. 200 meters and closing. "They're moving methodically. This isn't a rush. They're trying to contain you." "Contain." The word hit me like a punch because containing meant they didn't need to kill us right now, just needed to make sure we couldn't run. "River Valley teams?" Torin asked. "Still advancing. Rowan's engaging but he's outnumbered. I count at least 15 hostiles moving through the valley. They're maybe 3 minutes out from your position." 3 minutes. "East Ridge?" Lysandra asked from somewhere to my left. "Vehicles are in position. They've got equipment set up. Looks like they're establishing a blocking position. You won't be able to go that direction." My hands were shaking worse now because the math was getting clearer and it wasn't adding up in our favor. "Rowan," Torin said into the radio. "Status, static." Then Rowan's voice, tight with strain. "I'm holding but they're pushing hard. They've got better positioning. I'm going to have to fall back soon. Fall back to the logging yard. Move now." "Copy. Moving." Naira's voice came through again, faster now, almost panicked. "Wait. There's more movement. North side. I've got teams moving through the forest. They're trying to cut off the northern approach." "How many?" I asked, and I didn't realize I'd spoken out loud until everyone looked at me. "At least 10, Naira said. "They're spreading out. They're trying to close every exit. They're boxing us in," Lysandra said quietly. "Exactly," Naira confirmed. "Main force from the south, secondary teams from the east, River Valley teams from the north, and now blocking positions on the northern forest approach. You're surrounded on 4 sides." My chest felt tight and my vision was starting to blur at the edges because surrounded meant trapped and trapped meant we were going to have to fight our way out or surrender. "How long until they're in position?" Torin asked, and his voice was still calm but I could hear the edge underneath it now. "Main force?" 90 seconds. East Ridge? 2 minutes. River Valley? Rowan's maybe 2 minutes ahead of them. Northern teams? 3 minutes, but they're moving fast. They're coordinating, Atticus said. They're timing the assault. They want us all at once, I said. And my voice sounded hollow. The mill, Torin said suddenly. We fall back to the mill. It's more defensible. Better sightlines. We can hold them there longer. How much longer? Lysandra asked. Long enough for Naira to scout an escape route. There might not be one, Naira said quietly. They've got this area locked down tight. This is professional. This is coordinated. Then we buy time, Torin said. Everyone move. Now. Fall back to the mill. Naira, keep reporting. I want to know the second anything changes. Copy, Naira said. 60 seconds until main force reaches your current position. We started moving and my legs felt weak and my hands were still shaking and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were running out of time, that the hunters had planned this perfectly, that someone had told them exactly where we'd be and exactly how to trap us. Someone like Calder. But something was wrong because the East Ridge was supposed to be the secondary approach, was supposed to be where they might attack but probably wouldn't. Calder had said the main assault would come from the East Ridge. But the main assault had come from the south. And now they were flanking from the east anyway. My stomach twisted because either Calder had been wrong or he'd lied, and I didn't know which was worse. Atticus, I said. The East Ridge. What about it? Calder said they'd attack from there, but they didn't. They came from the south instead. So he was wrong. Or he lied. Atticus's expression darkened but he didn't have time to respond because Naira's voice came through the radio, urgent and panicked. They're coming from the River Valley. Multiple teams. Rowan's pinned down. My chest went cold because the River Valley was supposed to be clear, was supposed to be the one direction we didn't have to worry about. How many? Torin asked. At least 20. Maybe more. They're moving fast. Fall back. Everyone fall back to the logging yard. But we were already at the logging yard and the hunters were closing in from 3 directions and I realized with a sick feeling in my stomach that we were surrounded. Calder had told us they'd attack from the East Ridge. Instead they'd attacked from the south and the River Valley. And now we were trapped. He set us up, I said. And my voice was shaking. Calder set us up. We don't know that, Atticus said. But his tone suggested he was thinking the same thing. Yes we do. He told us the wrong approach. He made us position our defenses in the wrong places. He knew exactly what he was doing. More gunfire erupted from the south and I could see hunters advancing through the fog, moving in coordinated teams with weapons raised and movements precise. We need to move, Torin said. Now. Before they close the circle. Move where? Lysandra asked. They're everywhere. The mill. Old timber mill half a mile north. It's defensible and it gives us high ground. We'll never make it. We don't have a choice. The group started moving and I followed because my legs were shaking and my chest was on fire and I couldn't think of anything else to do. We ran through the forest and the fog was so thick I could barely see Atticus ahead of me, could barely hear anything except my own breathing and the sound of boots on wet ground and gunfire behind us getting closer. Something whistled past my head and I ducked instinctively, and a tree beside me exploded in a shower of splinters. They're targeting Elijah, Naira called from somewhere overhead. They know what he is. Keep moving, Torin shouted. My chest was burning and my hands were shaking and I could feel the shift trying to happen again. Could feel my body wanting to change because it thought that would keep me safe. Not yet. Not unless I had to. The timber mill appeared through the fog like a monument to decay. 3 stories of rotting wood and broken windows and rusted machinery that hadn't moved in decades. The roof was partially collapsed and the walls were covered in moss and the whole structure looked like it might fall apart if someone breathed on it too hard. Inside, Torin ordered. 2nd floor. Windows facing south. We climbed through a broken door and the interior was dark and smelled like mold and rotting wood and something dead. The stairs creaked under our weight and I was sure they were going to collapse but they held. The 2nd floor was more open, was mostly just a large room with broken windows overlooking the forest and machinery that had been left to rust. Positions, Torin said. Atticus, east windows. Lysandra, west. Elijah, stay in the center and don't move. Torin pulled the radio up to his mouth and I could hear the static crackle before he spoke. Naira, status on the main force. Her voice came back immediately, tight and urgent. Main assault team is 90 seconds out. They're moving into final approach positions. I count at least 40 personnel, maybe more. They've got the mill surrounded on 3 sides. 3 sides? What about the north? I asked. North is still clear but they're working on it, Naira said. And I could hear the strain in her voice. I've got teams moving through the forest trying to cut off that approach. They're maybe 2 minutes out. 2 minutes until we're completely boxed in, Lysandra said quietly. Rowan? Torin asked. Static. Then Rowan's voice, breathless and strained. I'm falling back through the eastern forest. River Valley teams are still pushing but I'm ahead of them. Maybe 90 seconds before they reach the mill perimeter toppy. Head for the north exit when you get here. Don't stop. Understood. Naira's voice crackled through again. Faster now. Wait. They're setting up equipment. Heavy cases. Looks like the same dragon suppression gear from the facility. They're positioning it on the south side, maybe 150 meters out. My stomach twisted because dragon suppression equipment meant they weren't just trying to trap us, they were trying to neutralize me specifically, trying to make sure I couldn't shift or fight or do anything except surrender. How long until they're in range? Torin asked. 60 seconds. Maybe less. They're moving fast and they're coordinated. This is professional, Torin. This is a full tactical assault. Escape routes? Lysandra asked. Limited, Naira said. North exit is still clear but closing. East and west are blocked. South is where the main force is concentrating. If you're going to run, you need to do it in the next 45 seconds. We're not running, Torin said. Then you're staying, Naira said, and her voice was hollow. Because in 45 seconds, you won't have a choice. The radio went quiet except for the sound of static and my own heartbeat, which was pounding so hard I was sure everyone could hear it. 30 seconds, Naira said. Main force is 30 seconds out. They're spreading into assault formation. I can see the commander. He's got a loudspeaker. They're going to try to get you to surrender. They won't get a surrender, Torin said. Then they'll get a siege, Naira said. And you're trapped inside with limited ammunition and no way out. The sound of engines was getting louder now. Was close enough that I could hear individual vehicles, could hear the rumble of the APCs and the higher pitch of the trucks and the sound of tires on gravel. 10 seconds, Naira said. They're almost on top of you. I'm moving to higher altitude for better visibility. Do it, Torin said. And then the first vehicle appeared through the fog. I wanted to argue but my throat was too tight and my hands were shaking too badly to hold anything. The hunters appeared through the fog maybe 30 seconds later. More of them than before, moving in coordinated teams, surrounding the building. They know we're here, Atticus said quietly. Of course they do, Lysandra said. They've known where we are since the beginning. Gunfire erupted from below and bullets tore through the walls and I dropped to the floor because standing felt like suicide. My chest was on fire and my hands were burning and I couldn't hold the shift back anymore because my body was screaming at me to change, to become what I was, to fight. Elijah, Atticus said, and his voice was urgent. Don't. Not yet. I can't hold it. Yes you can. Just a little longer. But I couldn't because the heat was building and my skin was burning and I could feel scales trying to push through and my bones were shifting and it hurt so badly I wanted to scream. The windows exploded inward and something metallic clattered across the floor. Grenade, Torin shouted. I didn't think. I shifted. Not fully but enough. Wings erupted from my back and my hands became claws and my skin hardened into scales and I threw myself over the grenade because I didn't know what else to do. The explosion was muffled but still powerful enough to throw me backward into the wall. My ears were ringing and my chest felt like it had been hit with a sledgehammer and I couldn't breathe properly. But I was alive. And so was everyone else. Elijah. Atticus was beside me, pulling me up. Are you okay? I nodded but I wasn't sure if it was true because everything hurt and my vision was blurry and I couldn't hear anything except ringing. The shift was still active and I couldn't pull it back because my body wouldn't listen, wouldn't respond to what I was telling it to do. More gunfire from below. More shouting. The sound of boots on stairs. They're coming up, Lysandra said. Then we go down, Torin said. Backstairs. Move. We ran and my wings scraped against the walls and my claws left gouges in the floor and I couldn't control any of it because the shift had taken over and I was just along for the ride. The backstairs were narrow and dark and they creaked under our weight and I was sure they were going to collapse but they held long enough for us to reach the ground floor. We burst out into the fog and the hunters were waiting. At least a dozen of them. Weapons raised, surrounding us. And in the center was a man with a loudspeaker and an expression that looked almost satisfied. He raised the loudspeaker and his voice echoed through the forest, loud and clear and impossible to ignore. Dragon target located.